Good morning, everyone. My name is Fernando Reimers, and I'm a professor of international education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And it's a real pleasure to welcome you all to the discussion of two case studies of innovative education practices that have been implemented in the city of Bogota by the Secretary of Education of the municipality and by the organization Alianza Educativa. And I'm going to give a little bit of context for what we're doing today, introduce our speakers, highlight what these cases are about and why they're important, and then we'll go on. So this webinar series is the result of a collaborative effort that has brought together four organizations: the World Bank Group, the Education Global Practice at the World Bank, the Directorate for Education and Skills at the OECD, the organization 100, and the Global Education Initiative at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. And our goal has been to provide evidence-based information to support decision-making to sustain educational opportunity during the COVID-19 pandemic. So in this webinar, we will have an option for those of you who need translation from Spanish to English to be able to hear. Some of the presenters will be addressing you in Spanish. And when that happens, you should use the interpretation button, which is at the bottom of your screen, and select English. When that person finishes speaking, you are to go back to the same button and then select off. That'll bring you back to the channel that we're currently using. If you have any questions, we ask that you use the question and answer function, which is at the bottom of the screen. And we will be taking your questions after we finish with the presentations. So the recording of this seminar will be available subsequent to this at the link that you have on the screen. And if you go to the second link where it says for more continuity stories, you're going to find about 20 various case studies of interesting practices of educational continuity. Now, this effort has to date consisted of the following products: the various continuity strategies, 2 reports based on surveys administered to fairly large number of people in a variety of countries around the world. One of them about 2.5 months ago, the other one about half months ago. Those are available, as well as a resource that is codifying a range of resources to support education online. Our goal is to, on the one hand, spotlight positive deviants, organizations, institutions, governments who, when the pandemic hit with obvious implications for educational opportunity, didn't just sit there or hide under the mattress, but actually did something, and did something that seemed to be promising, that in different ways sustain educational opportunity. So that's one goal. The second one is to present in some detail what was it that they did, because too often in education we use words to convey very different meanings, but the devil is really in the details of implementation. So this is what these case studies are about. These are case studies of implementation of educational practices that have sustained educational continuity, with the hope that sharing this information can inspire others. And can promote collective leadership, can promote collective learning and thinking and innovation. So one of the case studies we're going to discuss is a case study that will be presented by Deputy Secretary of Education of the City of Bogota, the Municipality of Bogota, Mauricio Castillo. And it's a case study of the strategy Aprende en Casa, learning at home. We're going to turn to him in just a moment. The second case study is a case study of the strategy adopted by Alianza Educativa, and it will be presented by the CEO of Alianza, Pablo Jaramillo. After we hear those presentations, we're going to hear comments and reflections from Andreas Schleicher, the Director of Education and Skills at the OECD, and we're going to hear from Mariana Sanz de Santamaria, who is an advisor to the Undersecretary of Educational Quality and Relevance in the Secretary of Education of Bogota, and also a graduate student at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. So what is interesting about these two case studies, which you can find on the links there? To my mind, these case studies are interesting because they highlight 6 features. Number one is you have 2 institutions who rather quickly innovated in creating alternative ways to sustain education for particularly vulnerable populations. So these cases illustrate fast, rapid response. Second, more importantly, both of these cases require a mind shift in how people thought about education. These cases were not about the world is changed, the kids can come to school, they're at home, how do we reproduce the school? They were rather about understanding the kids are at home. How do we strengthen the home so that we can educate and build partnerships with schools? So in many ways, these are cases that illustrate an adaptive approach to addressing these crises as opposed to a technical fix. Third thing is these cases are very much about learning from doing. They're about acting fast, learning fast, changing fast. These changes also, both of these cases illustrate views of the education organization that are very professional views. These cases do not illustrate at all a top-down model where a group of enlightened leaders decide what needs to be done and give instructions. Both of these cases are very much about a collaborative, a collegiate approach that recognizes the professionalism of people at various levels of the educational enterprise and that build mechanisms for this professionalism to surface. And these cases are interesting because they inspired others, particularly the strategy adopted by the municipality of Bogota immediately inspired other cities and eventually shaped the national strategy. And my hope is that it can inspire some cities in the United States, even perhaps the city of Boston. So with that as a way to frame what we're about to hear, let me now turn over, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, to Undersecretary Mauricio Castillo. Bienvenido, Mauricio. Gracias por estar con nosotros. And I'm going to ask him to share the highlights of this case and to share with us what, in his view, was most challenging. Mauricio, muchas gracias por estar con nosotros. And those of you who want to hear the translation, I ask that you now go to the interpretation button, which is on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. If you click there, you'll be able to hear Mauricio as opposed to hearing me. Mauricio, bienvenido. Muchas gracias por estar con nosotros. Si pudiera...
Could you take 4 or 5 minutes and talk about the Aprende en Casa strategy and what was most interesting and what was most challenging about the strategy? Good morning, Fernando. Thank you, Juan Pablo. It's nice to see you, Mariana and Andreas. Mariana is our advisor here at the Secretariat. Thank you very much. Fernando, quickly, I want to tell you, Aprende en Casa was a strategy that came about very quickly in this situation of quarantine. And Bogota decided on continuity to ensure that our children could continue their education, where indeed 1 week before we began working with our teachers and principals, and what we did was that we're going to use the tools we have to have virtual education, and that's how this initiative came about. So we had virtual content because at first we thought about our teachers, about those people that needed the greatest support. So we started looking at content and different content for our teachers, so there could be intermediation. But over time, we found that teachers not only needed support, but also our counselors, our parents, our students. So we began to quickly change, and the first thing we did was use TV. Bogota doesn't have educational TV like exists in other countries, there are isolated efforts, but we decided with Capital Canal to have some educational broadcasting. We did that 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon. And so no other city was able to do this. So we guided teachers about how they could use these programs so that they could then use this. Now, quickly, we also had a radio programs that were focused. There was a first exercise. We had programs for teachers, for parents, because what we are seeking and what we saw from the beginning was not impose schools or classrooms on the home. We didn't want to do this. No, this isn't homeschool. Rather, we wanted the home to become a pedagogical space where students could develop skills, to blend home activities, school activities. On average, the students are studying 3 to 5 hours. If they're smaller, less. But it's very difficult at home. We didn't want to impose school on the home. No, we wanted to support a different process, support parents, support teachers. So we used the TV and radio. And when we realized that we can also use virtual media, well, that's great, but 4 out of 5 students don't have internet access, they don't have devices, so this is very difficult. So they became isolated. Now, 98% of our homes do have cell phones. So that was what we used, at least to reach families. And so we also came up with another program to take materials to homes. It was called Aprende en Casa, Toca tu Puerta. In other words, we knocked on their door. We had also these materials that we took to them. We gave support to these homes, and then the schools also would identify those that did not have access to try to help. And so we had this knocking on the door, and what did we do? 4 main things. We had a portal with contents, and we had hard copy materials, but we had to keep working. Other things we had to do was to support teachers as much as possible. And we had to train them to use these tools. The Secretariat has tools to do this. And indeed, what we saw was that there were important gaps. Our teachers were not used to using ICTs in their teaching. So we had to support them so that they could use the tools. We did this in different ways. We did it through the phone. That's what we used the most. We had very positive outcomes with families. We have been able to have families become more involved in their children's learning. And so they were able to share the homework with them, the activities. It's not easy. We've had students that were completely isolated. We weren't able to reach them. The economic situation of many of our families mean that many of them had to drop out because they had to find a way to make a living. Now we have also school nutrition programs. We wanted to send the message that this was a whole package of measures. We offered lunch and meals to all students. So we started to also give coupons that could be used, redeemed at supermarkets. More than 300 stores were available to these families. It was 50,000 Colombian pesos. It's not a lot of money, but it is a coupon that can only be used for food. And in rural areas, they could be used at different markets. In the rural areas, we also had donations of books, literature, etc. And so now we have to think of what we're going to do, and now that that school is out, because we do want to continue with this. Thank you.
una, una, una alianza con el sector privado, con el sector público, para permitir que diferentes actores se pusieran
allow for different actors to agree and come up with this new alternative system. And it's clear that there was a great effort to have communication within the system, where you have these meetings convening teachers and principals. I imagine that's very complex. Not only does it take a lot of time, but it's very complex to have everyone agree on something. Can you talk about these challenges and how did you address them? And related to this, the second thing that really strikes me about this case is the capacity to not only launch a prototype of a strategy, but also to correct this during 3 phases of the strategy. And how do you think that this, how were you able to be so quick in launching this? It's not common, not even in the private sector. So could you talk about this? Yes, thank you, Fernando, of course. Well, we have tried to change and be on top of everything, be ahead of the curve, thinking of our teachers and principals. We talked with them in an ongoing manner. We had the possibility to have conversations and discussions with them, receive their feedback. Sometimes, especially at the beginning, we made a lot of mistakes. The work teachers had to do tripled because we didn't know really what we were dealing with. And families too, they told us we are becoming overwhelmed by all of these school activities. We don't have time, we don't have resources, we don't have the support to do this. So, but over time, we were able to handle this. And I think that we were able to issue guidelines, circulars that guided the process. So first, we decided to focus on specific skills and contents that we wanted to really emphasize. We couldn't take everything to the homes. So we said to our educators, we need to focus on specific things, but in a cross-cutting manner. And so we did this through circulars that we issued. We started in April, and this sent a message to our educational institutions. We talked a lot with school management, teachers, parents, and received their feedback. And this allowed us to be quick. Now, with the TV and radio programs, this has worked quite well. We need to use it much more. but that is a challenge. And we are also using the resources we already had in our institutions. For example, well, we have equipment at these schools and institutions, and so we want low-income students to be able to use this equipment. So quickly, we issued a circular to have procedures so we could loan students devices and equipment. These were very clear guidelines so that teachers and parents understand. They were all very concerned about what was going to happen. For example, are the students going to pass from one grade to another? And we wanted to tell them they shouldn't worry. We needed to know what was going on at home, understand what was going on. Also, we decided not to really use grades per se, rather we were evaluating students in a different way.
Muchas gracias, Mauricio. Muy útil. Vamos a pasar ahora a Pablo. I'm going to switch to English. And if you were in the interpretation channel, go back to that button now, click again and press off. So let's switch to you, Pablo. Can you share with us the highlights of what Alianza Educativa did, and what do you think was most challenging, and how were you able to address those challenges?
Thank you, Fernando. Hi, everyone. Mauricio, Andreas, Mariana. It's a pleasure to be here. Alianza Educativa is a network of 11 charter schools here in Bogota. So we're actually part of the public education system here in the city. And it's great to see you here, Mauricio, because in some way we work very closely with the Department of Education. All the guidelines, you know, and the general framework of the initiative, it's the key for us. That's why we also call it Aprende en Casa and Learn at Home. Now, what's interesting about this case, Fernando, is that it shows what happens at a school level, right? And how organizations like ours at Alianza sort of interpret these guidelines from the Department of Education or the ministry, but then how we got things done, right? So in some, we have 11 schools, 11,000 students, all of them in some of the most underserved communities in Bogota. 32% of them don't have access to internet or don't have any computers or laptops at home. They're exposed to a lot of social risks. So when the schools closed, the challenge that we had is, okay, how are we going to do all these things immediately? Because the sense of urgency is so big, but we didn't have a clue of how things had to be done. We had never done things in this way. And it's important, Fernando, that you mentioned the difference between technical and adaptive challenges. In some way, I think most of the schools in cities or countries have faced very similar technical challenges: connectivity, reaching the students, setting up, like a logistical operation to send materials to the students, whatever. Now, what has been very important for us is to focus on creating capacities and to really create an adaptive response to such a crisis. And let me show you some of the things that we have done so far that I think can be interesting or helpful for other schools and organizations. So first of all, we split the problem. When schools got closed and it was so overwhelmingly challenging, we said, okay, we need to do this in stages. So first stage, we only focused on reaching to students. We set up some basic guides and we distributed them to the students, but we didn't have any virtual classes. We didn't have synchronous sessions. We just focused on reaching to students, making sure they were okay. But during that stage, we also focused on creating capacities. For instance, how are we going to connect and with the families? How are we going to implement synchronous sessions in the next stage? And second thing that we did is we created task forces within the organization. This requires a very quick response or responses. So you need to empower groups of people who can think the problems through, who can figure things out, and then come up with solutions. And that has been very effective for us because we are currently in one stage, but there are 2 or 3 teams thinking on the next stage, preparing for the next stage, thinking what's next. we created a central command post, and that has been key. In the first weeks, it was chaotic. So we met daily with the 11 principals, with all the senior leadership, and we were tackling challenges and needs as soon as possible. We centralized those decisions, and we put a lot of emphasis on communications. One of the key challenges, and actually Fernando, Andreas, you mentioned that in your report, is the way we, in leadership positions, convey the decisions or convey the responses to the entire community, to parents, to students, to teachers, so that they not only they understand what we're doing, but that we get the buy-in from them. In terms of academics, and this is key, we had to rethink the entire learning route. That's how we call it, the learning process. How does a student learn when he's at home? What happens in the brain when he's sitting at home doing just paperwork or working with a guide? And if you just get him in a synchronous session, okay, what happens in his brain? What is the cognitive process that helps him learn? And this is key, because most of our learning at Alianza Educativa happens through social interactions. We're very Vygotskian. We think that learning happens in the social realm, and then it transforms to the brain and becomes skills. Now, when you don't have space for interactions, how are we going to get the students to learn? Adapting the teaching side of the story is very easy. It's a technical problem. But understanding how the kids learn and how we sort of like create a new entire learning route has been very, very challenging. And second, evaluation policy, and you, Mauricio, mentioned it. We are used to just setting up the rules, and we set the rules for the students, the communities, and this required a big effort in changing our mindset. So this year, students are not going to fail, but if they don't do the proper work, they get a pending in their grades, and that's for me a good balance, because it's a very understanding response to them, but it doesn't mean automatic promotion, because that can be bad for some students. Actually, decisions on promotions will be made together with families. That's our policy. If we think that a student needs to just fail and repeat a grade, we will make those solutions with families. So those, Fernando, are some of the things we have done, very successful so far, but we haven't figured everything out, and actually it will take longer until we just fine tune our entire system and keep improving in every single stage of our initiative.
Pablo, thank you so much for your emphasis on the adaptive nature of the challenges you addressed. Let me ask you a question that has to do with scale. One of the things that seems interesting to me is that the Alianza seems to recognize that some problems cannot be resolved at the school level. And therefore, that's why you've created this network that you then strengthen with alliances with universities, with very good schools. It's a brilliant idea that preceded the creation of that. And I can see how in a city like Bogota, which is a small city, but let's face it, 400 schools is larger than the education system of Singapore, and 750,000 students is actually a considerable system. So I would like for you to speak about how scale is relevant to being able to support students in having continuity. What is it that you are able to do that the municipality is actually not able to do, even though it's only a city? And what is it that you're able to do that a school is not able to do? In many ways, I think that we have here three levels of possible response: the school response, your unit, your network of schools response, and then a city or a district. And I think it'd be helpful to understand what are the comparative advantages of solving these problems at various levels. Can you address that?
Well, it's a very interesting question, Fernando, and I think it has to do with again splitting the problem. You have to have some people thinking about the challenges, but also thinking beforehand, before they arrive, and that's key for us at a school level. A principal, a coordinator, the teacher, they don't have time to think about what's next or what's coming in 1 or 2 months. They are just focused on what's happening today in this very minute, right? When you have a people at a central office, we can do that. So we think, okay, we're currently on stage 3, but what will happen in August? You know, what's our next challenge? Who's going to think about this problem? And that helps, you know, the organization move forward. Now, at a city level, for me, the most powerful thing, and what Mauricio was talking about, is just connecting people, right? And not only just setting the guidelines so that everyone is focused on some things, but let's say, okay, let's get together, let's get all the principals together. Let's make sure we're aligned on priorities. Let's make sure that we transfer what has been working in some schools, and so that other people learn from that. The central command post that I did every day, and then every week with my principals, had that purpose. Every principal had to speak for 10 minutes about what's happening in his school, and the other principals were listening to that, and they were taking note. Actually, that helps, that worked. I could do this in my school. So this has a lot to do, Fernando, with the possibility of connecting people, creating a network of collaboration, of having teams simultaneously tackling the challenges, you know, in the schools, but also thinking about what's next and how to improve, and then having people at the schools very focused on the delivery and the you know, on the delivery part of the challenge.
Thank you very much, Pablo. Let's hear from Mariana and from Andreas. As you listen about these two cases, what strikes you as transferable, as valuable for others? And maybe we can begin with you, Mariana, who have played multiple roles, both helping shape that strategy, helping write the case study. But I'm asking you now to take some distance as a Harvard graduate student from this case and think about what do you think would be valuable for other systems from the two cases that we have heard.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much for this invitation and for this opportunity to show and share with other people from all over the world what Bogota has been doing to continue education. So thinking about what are the key takeaways of the Secretary of Education, which is the one I'm more close to, I believe that one of the most important things that the Secretary of Education did in this strategy of Aprende en Casa is that, as both Pablo and Mauricio had said, we have a very heterogeneous population with very complicated social economic differences. And there's a huge gap in digital access and internet access. So the fact that we reached out in different channels and that we did not base our strategy only in internet access or in technological access, it made I believe the strategy successful, because using TV, using radio, using printed resources allowed us to reach out to more students and not basing our strategy only in internet or technological access, which would made it a failure. And this actually also allowed, because now you see educational content all over the place, in TV, in radio, in newspapers, and this didn't happen before. And this was a call for society to understand that education is a co-responsibility and is not only the school's responsibility, it is part of the whole society. So this was the fact that the response to this crisis made us reach out to many resources, made the society say, okay, wow, education is our responsibility too. And kids need to find all the resources to continue their education. So this was one of the first important things, is that it's a multi-channel strategy. And the second one, and I think that is good as for other cities and other rural places, is that this strategy led to an unprecedented family engagement. And as Mauricio was saying, finally, this historical separation of school and home got united, and not making the school get into the house, but making making the house an environment to learn, and finally engaging the families to see what their kids are learning, to see what is it that is going on in school. And a channel that was disrupted for many years between the teachers and the parents opened up, and using WhatsApp, for example. WhatsApp has been the key channel all over the country. And this communication channel between the parents and the teachers also led to another key point, is that now education is more contextualized. I don't know if that's the right term to say, but it is based on a more accurate diagnosis of the students' reality, because now the teachers have been able to see what is going on in their students' lives, and to see, okay, so what I'm teaching them, is it relevant for them or not? And this, as Pablo was saying, made them rethink education. Okay, we have to reload everything. We have to change what we were teaching. And that is a major challenge to switch your mindset of many years teaching the same thing. And now you know what your students, how their houses are, how their families work. And this led to a change that that now for teachers, the well-being of their students is more important than before. And that is one of the key things is now for the Secretary of Education for Aprende en Casa 2.0, is after the break, is to focus more in social emotional skills and making the students be the teachers as well. So these are some of the things that some teachers did. For example, they flipped the responsibility of learning to the children, to the students, and that is something very nice for the students to discover that their reality and their daily routines can be taught to their classmates. And I would say that the fourth thing that is very important is that for many years, technological support and internet access had been deferred because of other priorities. And this pandemic accelerated this process. And the whole society, as you were saying, this network that Alianza Educativa and also the Secretary of Education started to reach out to private sectors, to companies, to institutions, to, okay, we have to close this gap that is huge. And technological access and internet access has to be a priority. And that is something that is going now to also rural area, where the gap is even broader. And many other organizations, such as Enseña por Colombia, has done a big work to try to close that gap. So I would say those four things are the key takeaways of the strategy.
Thank you very much, Mariana. Andreas, you spend a lot of your time working with governments in many different countries on reform issues, but these days on helping them think through about how to address educational continuity. From your unique vantage point, what do you think are the most important lessons that these cases have to offer other countries?
Yeah, first of all, I want to really congratulate Mauricio and Pablo, and it's in fact the city of Bogota. I mean, this is not the first time the city shows remarkable resilience and innovation. In fact, when I visited Bogota first in the early 2000s, it was a very polluted place. In 2006, I saw actually the biggest waste factory transformed into a library and an education center for families. So I think Bogota has a history of change, transformation, innovation. At the very same time, what really interests me in this case is that this is entirely replicable. There's nothing of this that couldn't be done by other people in other places. And I think that makes this experience really, really special. Sort of my key takeaway, I mean, apart from what Mariana just said, is be open to the voices from the front line. Just have your ear on the ground. Don't make big plans, very abstract plans, but actually, listen to what is actually needed and be fast and learn fast from this. I think this is something I take away from this, and do that in collaboration with stakeholders. I think really we should learn a lot more from this, because many of the strategies of contingency have failed because you had a clash between things that were dreamt up somewhere in a government office and in work on the ground. I think you've really done that very well, to keep your eyes on the ground. The second point, to build a really robust ecosystem of stakeholders, to think about learning as a whole of society project, and to look at both the supply and the demand side. I also think your decision to carefully stage that process has been important, reaching out to students first, keeping the connection with the learner. If you lose that connection, everything else is lost. You can have the best teachers, the best technologies. If you actually lose touch with the people you're serving, and I think you're setting priorities in the sense, let's build that connection first and then build the ecosystem around those people. I think that's a very, very powerful lesson. Again, I think it's entirely replicable. Your ecosystem of technologies. Most of the discussion internationally is around online learning with computers. And why? Because that is the past. Computers were there first. And that's where most online learning has developed. What you found out quite rightly, and I think, again, you will find many cities around the world, well, some people have computers, but everybody has a mobile phone. Sort of, rather than hanging on to the past, you've asked yourself, what is the technology that people have now, rather than, sending out laptops or computers? What is available now? How can we use the technologies of our times to build a new online kind of learning system? And I think, again, and then complementing this with television. And I think, again, we often forget some of the technologies that work really well, particularly for smaller children. And I don't think many countries have. Actually, South America has been quite good at this, but globally, I've not seen many countries very actively using other types of media, and I think that's been a really, really good way. Your effort to work with not, teachers or technologies, but teachers and technologies from the very first day, supporting, educators to capitalize on the new potentials of new technologies. I think, again, many teachers in many countries have been left on their own devices with very little support. And I think you recognized, if the technology can amplify very good teaching, but it will never replace sport teaching. So you need to get, the educators and the technology on the same page. And I think that investment, has been very, very important. Again, I think it's something that we can do also, not to forget about, as you called it, hard copy education. I think that's also important. How do we actually ensure that we use, in, textbooks, other material that exists. Another aspect, I think, and I must say, actually, this is increasingly recognized, is the recognition that education is a social service. It's not just about transaction and transmission of knowledge and consumption of knowledge, but actually that schools play a very, very important role in building social capital, bridging social capital, and building relationships and learning itself. As you say, this is not something you invented. I mean, neuroscience tells us this, that actually we learn from and with people. We do not learn in the abstract. That's why MOOCs have been so terribly unsuccessful. And I think you build that into your system. You recognize education is a social service, and your way of giving people coupons, not just providing that service, but enabling people to actually access social services, I think is a very, very important part. So yeah, I think, all of those lessons, I think, are extremely valuable. I'm very grateful that you share them generously, because I do think there's far too little sharing of the good practices and good experiences around the world in this moment.
Andreas, thank you so very much. In a moment, I'm going to call on 3 people who are in the audience and who did not know I was going to call them. This is what happens at these seminars. We have a bit of spontaneity, so I'm giving them a heads up. I'm going to call on Barbara Bruns, Elisa Bonilla, and Sergio Paez, and I'll explain why when they come in. But I'm going to ask them to comment on how they think that Brazil, Mexico, and the United States actually could incorporate lessons from these cases. But before I do that, I'm going to call on Stéphane Vincent Lacren at the OECD, who along with Andreas has been a splendid partner in investing time in generating all this knowledge. And Stéphane really has been the key person of the OECD working on all these case studies. So he's well situated to compare them to other places. Stéphane, would you like to share with us your views on what makes these cases unique? And then in the meantime, I'm going to give the voice to those people who I'm sure were just surprised that I call on them.
Thanks, Fernando. Yes, I really like very much these cases. I think that indeed involvement of the stakeholders made them very, very interesting. One of the big challenges, that many countries have had in actually offering many of these resources was to curate them in a very nice way. And actually, I think that it was done very early and very well so that it could be accessible to teachers and families. So that's, I think, a very interesting lesson of this one. Generally speaking, the phasing of that, it's a very, of course, strong approach. It's not unique to these two cases, and we have witnesses in a few others, but it was very well done, a very pragmatic way of doing it. And indeed, the multimedia approach to it, going from worksheets to radio, portal, trying to reach out to directly working with people in different ways. So that's really, I would say, this multimodality of the means makes them very interesting and successful cases.
Thank you so much, Stéphane. Barbara, I don't know if you're there. Can you say if you're there and you're willing to speak? And then I'll introduce you. Yes, you are there. So
yes,
I'm calling on Barbara for two reasons. Barbara had a very distinguished career as an education specialist at the World Bank, but she has two areas of deep expertise, which are the reason why I call her. One is Brazil. I think she is probably an honorary Brazilian. She knows that education system very well, and I suspect she's following very closely how Brazil is responding to the pandemic. And the other one is teacher preparation. She has invested a lot of her intellectual capital in understanding how to strengthen teachers and so on. And I'm sure that it's dawned on you how these strategies calling on teachers to take on their roles very differently. So as you look at this case, Barbara, what do you think it would take for Brazil to take some of these ideas and implement them in some cities? And if you could keep your marks to 3 minutes or less so we can hear from others, that'd be great. Thank you.
Absolutely, I can keep my remarks short. Thanks very much, Fernando, for this surprise. Let me just say, I found the cases fascinating and great examples, and I think there's very much that other education systems can learn from this systematic approach and these principles. But I see a lot of continuity between these principles and even older innovations in Colombia, like the Escuela Nueva. I'm struck by the fact that kind of three of the core principles that you've embedded in your approach really were predicted by the Escuela Nueva. First thing, having a modular curriculum that's oriented to children's own pace of learning. So when a pandemic hits, if the students already have those kinds of materials with them and they were designed to be used either in the school context or at home in rural areas when students had to drop out of school to help with the agricultural production decades ago. And the second is this strong tradition of teacher networks, training teachers on the ground in demonstration schools and having support mechanisms to go out and continue the relationship and have the peer learning, which I understand now has been transformed into a really rich set of online materials for teachers that the Escuela Nueva is using. And the third thing is putting the school in touch with families and the community, embedding the school and learning processes in the families. I remember a lot of Escuela Nueva exercises that had students interview elders in their community, or they analyze the division of labor inside their household. And so I think I see those principles reflected in a lot of the work that Bogota has been doing. And I just want to give some credit to my friend Vicky Colbert and the and the, now 40-year-old innovation of the Escuela Nueva that has really been important in Colombia. Brazil, I just have to say, is a sad story at the moment. I mean, the government chaos is so profound that is really creating problems for cities all throughout the country. And the ones I've seen, Rio municipality, Sao Paulo, they're very much trying to do some of the same things that Colombia is doing, but are having a lot more trouble. So I'm sorry, I can't say anything more specific because I haven't been there recently, obviously. But I think it'd be interesting to invite to see what Sobral is doing, to see what State of Pernambuco is doing, some of the education leaders in Brazil.
Thank you, Barbara. We do have a case study of the state of Sao Paulo and on the chat. Let me call on Elisa Bonilla, who's a former Undersecretary of Education of Mexico, and who now is one of the architects of an organization in civil society that is promoting education reform from civil society. Elisa, are you with us?
Yes, Fernando. Nice to talk to you.
Can you give us your
you.
three-minute reactions to what you heard and what could Mexico learn from it?
Yes, very interesting what I've heard. I've already read the reports, and I think we have a lot to learn in Mexico from what Colombia and particularly Bogota is doing. Mexico has followed also a multi-channel strategy, except that it has been very much top-down, and I think we could learn a lot about this being an adaptive challenge and the need to involve more stakeholders, particularly parents, and to listen more to teachers, which I don't think is something that's been done enough. We need to promote more flexibility and more decision-making at the community level to take into account the variability of context, which I don't think that's been taken into account enough either. And organizing school networks, I think that's a very, very important take that I take with me today. And also, I would stress developing more distance education tools for mobiles, as Andreas was saying, because I think for a long time we've been concentrating quite too much on PCs and desktop and laptops and so on, but we need to do more about that. And I'm most interested in WhatsApp because I think everybody is saying how much WhatsApp is being used everywhere, here for certain as well. So thank you. It's been very, very interesting. And I think there's a lot to take to Mexico from you.
Thank you so much, Elisa. Sergio Paez is in a senior leadership role in Central Falls District in the United States, in Providence, a high immigrant, high poverty community. He's been at the forefront of designing the response and is one of the authors of one of the cases here. Sergio, he's also originally from Colombia, so I imagine you listen with great interest. Did you hear anything, Sergio, that you think the US could learn from today, and what was it? And if you could keep it to 3 minutes or less, that'd be great.
Yes, Fernando, how are you? Thanks for the opportunity. No, I heard a great opportunity to learn about the connection between the charter schools and the other public schools. I think that having that collaboration really saves a lot of time because we are trying to do things independently from each other. And I think having that collaboration might be a good way to go. We are, as you know, struggling to find the right solution to these challenges. And also we see that creating gaps, so gap creation is happening in front of us. How we're going to be addressing those issues as we move forward. So I'll be paying close attention to what happened in Colombia and Bogota to make sure that we copy or we can learn from some of the things that they're doing in there. But we're struggling with the same issues. We're trying to define what the distance learning will look like in September. We're trying to do some hybrid models for the summer to see that is have presence, have in front of us, have at home. And then we're trying to just learn how we can protect teachers, how we can protect students, how we can nurture our families to be prepared for next semester. So I think this case study, and I'm very proud of my paisanos from Colombia, I'm all from Bogota as well. And I think it's great that we see this progress being made in Bogota. So I'm happy that also collaborating with you in this case study. And I'm looking forward to trying to shape the future of education. education. We definitely see two types of kids, the ones that are motivated and the ones that are not. We're trying to find out how can we motivate all of them to be able to learn in this process.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask our panelists to take a moment to look at the questions that are in the Q&A and then maybe shape your remarks if you can to address several of them. But before I turn to you, Bettina Stodd is also in a senior leadership role in the state of Virginia. Bettina, did you hear anything that you think Virginia could learn from? And what would it take to get the state to adopt some of what you heard?
Thank you so much, Fernando. It is really a joy to listen to all of you. I'm just processing. Yes, of course it is relevant. I totally agree. These are all things we can implement in the United States. We were just I love how Andreas said we have to create this ecosystem of learning, right? We just looked at computers, and right now we have discussions. Well, we need to reach our families with text messages and maybe link little videos and have other students, secondary heritage speakers, maybe create some authentic videos that we can link in those text messages. We also believe, and I heard it from Bogota and Colombia, I love the examples, is that it's so important to reach these kids first. We have the same problem, maybe not on the magnitude, but we do have a lot of kids that where parents are totally overwhelmed in using computers and our Canvas, our learning management system. So right now we're planning parent academies. We really feel like it is a community undertaking. And so thank you. I feel reinforced that we're on the right track, and I'm looking forward to other sessions.
Thank you, Bettina. I hope you'll share this information with your colleagues. We certainly need more people in leadership positions in the US to appreciate what the country could learn from other places like Bogota. I'm going to turn over to Mauricio and ask you to maybe make some final remarks and address any of the questions that are in the Q&A. And then I'll be doing the same with the rest of you who spoke. So remember to use the interpretation button. Mauricio, algunos comentarios finales en un par de minutos.
Mauricio, if you would like to make some final remarks and address any of the questions that you see in the chat. Thank you, Fernando. I wanted to say that we believe that we need to all work on these issues to have virtual learning. I think it's important to do this in phases. You need to have a collaboration and communication. I think Pablo's right. We need to have a network. We need to focus on efforts on this, and Mariana mentioned Aprende en Casa 2.0, and so we have incorporated into that a flexible curriculum. We want to strengthen this tie between school and home. Yes, virtual online learning is a way to do this, but we need to use all our resources, TV, radio, and Escuela Nueva has been an example we've used for many years, and it has helped us use these collaborative guides within the school with parents to strengthen our learning environments at home. And we cannot lose sight of the social and emotional skills we need to teach. Of course, we need to go beyond just the transmission of learning and also use this relationship that exists between parents and children. We need to work also with our smallest students. We need to give resources to teachers at homes and focus on early education. In Bogota, we are working with the private sector here from the state so that we can, in the best way, address our ongoing challenges and have an education that is in keeping with our current situation, and use all resources, not just a computer, not just a tablet. Cell phones are a great tool, as Andreas said, and we have been doing this, but we need to unite efforts, and I just wanted to emphasize those issues. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mauricio.
What are your final thoughts?
Fernando, I want to remind us all that the problem here is learning, and we're currently facing a learning crisis, very dramatic one. The learning loss is very big, and the gap for the most vulnerable kids is very, very big. Now, this was already happening before COVID, and we already had a learning crisis. Let's don't forget about that. So in these last months, we have all responded to the access challenge. Again, I think a technical one. How do I facilitate the conditions for learning? But if we keep focusing on learning, we can better respond to this challenge, or we will respond better in the next months, right? The families are now our allies, as Mariana mentioned, and what Andreas told about creating these conditions in the environment is key. The families are in the classrooms right now, and they're also holding us accountable. So what's great is that a parent is watching now a class, and he's saying, okay, that's a good or it's a bad class. My kids are not learning. What's going on? So it's helping us a lot with accountability. And I want to remind us also about the most vulnerable kids, because 60-70% of the students have adapted well. They're learning. Probably they're having a 20-30% learning loss, but they're learning. They're good. They're in a healthy relationship at home. But the most vulnerable kids are being left behind, and that's why I think we have a sense of urgency of responding to that in the next weeks or months.
Pablo, thank you. Mariana, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. Just taking a look at the questions and answers in the chat. One of the things I would like to highlight is that Paolo Alberghini was asking if there has been an engagement in the TV and radio programs, and yes, there has been, and it has been increasing. And how do we know that? Because of the teachers' feedback and the families' feedback on monitoring the use of this resource, and because the TV and the radio strategies have been very much focused on family learning and not only the students learning. And this takes me to another question on how to not go back to the separation between school and family. And I believe it is because, as Pablo was saying, families are now allies of the school, and they have been there has been cases of, for example, parents being co-evaluators of the students, and now evaluation has shifted to a more qualitative feedback on attitude, on motivation, on effort, and has abandoned a lot this strict mindset of numbers and quantitative evaluation. And there's another question about how this multimedia approach has reached rural areas, and I would like to talk about one big initiative to go into radio stations of community stations, because in rurality, radio is huge. Radio is the main communication channel, and many teachers, many from Enseña por Colombia, for example, have gathered rural teachers to make podcasts and radio stories and engaging teachers and families, and there has been a huge feedback with students' testimonies on those programs.
Mariana, thank you so very much. I think Andreas has left us. Are you still with us, Andreas? No, and I ran a little bit over. So let me just conclude, first of all, by thanking our speakers today, and by thanking all of you who made time this morning to come together to learn how is it that Colombia is sustaining educational opportunity. I think it was the Minister of Education of France this morning who said something to the effect that COVID was a big global catastrophe for education, or a big global calamity. And I agree that COVID could be a major disruption to education around the world, and one from which some children would never recover. The examples that we have heard this morning are very inspiring because they illustrate the power of ordinary people to step up and make sure that that global calamity, the impact of that calamity, is mitigated. And I want to conclude with this quote from Hannah Arendt in how she describes what education is, because I do think that is what these examples are showing us, and that is what I hope each and every one of you who joined this morning is here. Education is the point at which we decide whether we love the world enough to assume responsibility for it, and by the same token, save it from that ruin, which, except for renewal, except for the coming of the new and the young, would be inevitable. And education, too, is where we decide whether we love our children enough not to expel them from our world and leave them to their own devices, not to strike from their hands their chance of undertaking something new, something unforeseen by us, but to prepare them in advance for the task of renewing a common world. And so to all of you, not only those who presented, but those of you who made the time to be with us and who share in that aspiration, in making it possible for children to gain the skills to make a better world, thank you for that commitment. Thank you all very much.